Okay, last night we talked about step one, which is the problem. Step one is the mitigating factor that brings us all to this room. You know, if we didn't have something in common, I dare say our book talks about that we're people that normally wouldn't mix. And what we talked about last night was the twofold symptoms of the problem. And one of the most important parts about it is that is of the physical allergy. When we talk about an allergy, most people think about an allergy as something that has an outward or physical manifestation, like runny nose, welts, dysentery, sneezing, coughing. That's the type of allergy that most of us are really sort of used to seeing. But this allergy, Silkworth said he didn't like that word, but this allergy is one of such that you can't see. Matter of fact, this manifestation is inward. And he used the term a phenomenon of craving because it only occurs in the alcoholic. It does not occur in the average temperate drinker. You see, only alcoholics crave alcoholics. Heavy drinkers, moderate drinkers, never, ever, ever crave alcohol. So that distinguishes us from the norm. Now, Silkworth, again, was a neuropsychiatrist, so he knew something about the workings of the mind. And he said he did not stand with the fact that he thought that all of the problem of the alcoholic was in the mind. He says the body is sickened as well as the mind. So therefore, he said that we have an allergic reaction to it. Now, as we're looking around the room, we don't know who's afflicted with what, whether it be some other substance or whether it be Al-Anon or whether it be OA or whatever it is. But from Silkworth's definition of what he called the disease concept, and he used these words perfectly, because today we know that addiction, period, is a manifestation of a disease of the mind, a sick mind. And the two things that attaches all addictions together is lack of control and the inability to quit. Not stop, to quit. Doesn't make any difference whether it's picking your nose. If when you start picking your nose, you lose control of that. And then on your own, when you tell yourself you're going to quit, not stop, and you can't quit, then that renders you powerless. It's as simple as that. So it makes no difference. You see, a lot of us think that it's relegated to how much we drink and what time we drink or what we drink, but it's not relegated to that. The thing is that when you drink, can you control the amount that you drink? And then when you tell yourself that you're going to quit, not stop, completely, totally quit, can you quit on your own? Bill says if that be the case, if those two things are manifested in your life, he says, then you're probably alcoholic, but definitely you're powerless. So when you consider that, then he says, and that means that we are under the grips of a progressive illness that gets worse, never better, and we move beyond human power. So therefore, we can't quit on our own, and no one else can cause us to quit. So we must accept spiritual help. We're going to read a little bit this morning. We're going to start off with, now some of us have third editions and fourth editions. I have a fourth edition. And we're going to start off with the doctor's opinion. We're going to reconfirm what we went over last night. Now we're going to give you the technical or information about what we explained, and that is on Roman numeral page XXV 25. Would you read for me, Victor?
Good morning. Reading from Appendix 25, the doctor's opinion. We of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader will be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery described in this book. Convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have had experience with the suffering of our members and have witnessed our return to health. A well-known doctor, chief physician at a nationally prominent hospital specializing in alcoholic and drug addiction, gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. To whom it may concern, I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. In late 1934, I attended a patient who, though he had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, was an alcoholic of a type I had come to regard as hopeless. In the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. This man and over 100 others appear to have recovered. I personally know scores of cases who were of the type with whom other methods had failed completely. These facts appear to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of rapid growth inherent in this group. They may mark a new epoch in the annals of alcoholism. These men may well have a remedy for thousands of such situations. You may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. Very truly yours, William D. Silkworth, M.D.
Okay. The physician who, at our request, gave us this letter and has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. In this statement, he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as normal as his mind. It did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality, or were outright mental defectives. These things were true to some extent, in fact, to considerable extent with some of us. But we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out the physical factor is incomplete. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As laymen, our opinion as it is soundness as laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may, of course, mean little. But as ex-problem drinkers, we can say that this explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account. Victor?
Though we work at our solution on the spiritual as well as the altruistic plane, we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged. More often than not, it is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he is approached, as he is then better a chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. Mm-hmm. The doctor writes, the subject presented in this book seems to me to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. I say this after many years' experience as medical director of one of the oldest hospitals in the country treating alcoholic and drug addiction. There was, therefore, a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in these pages. We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. Many years ago, one of the leading contributors to this book came under our care in this hospital, and while here he acquired some ideas which he put into practical application at once. Later, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients here, and with some misgiving, we consented. The cases we have followed through have been most interesting in fact. Many of them are amazing. The unselfishness of these men as we have come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive, and their community spirit is indeed inspiring to one who has labored long and wearily in the alcoholic field. They believe in themselves, and still more in the power which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. Of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor, and this often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit.
Now here he's talking about both parts of the problem. You see, we have to be separated from or detoxified from the substance, and the substance has to be completely out of our bodies. Now, most of us, as I explained last night, the only thing that we do is we pass out and we wake up the next morning. Alcohol has not metabolized or out of our body, and we wake up and we still have remnants in there, and so therefore we start drinking all over again, or we just drink all through the night. So therefore, when a person is inundated in this stupor, they have to be separated from the substance, completely and totally detoxified. And remember, alcohol is a toxic substance. So we're talking about removing that from the body, and then something can be done with the psychological part. Keep reading.
We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all, and once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve.
Now he's talking about the people that have used alcohol at some degree, with some degree of limited success. He says, once we develop this habit, you see, a lot of us start off drinking as I explained last night, as a temporary solution to a presenting problem, whether it be stress, whether it be relaxation, whether it be recreation, or whether it just be going out partying, or a little nervousness, a little anxiety. You see, any time that we use any chemical, that use of that chemical is an experiment. We do not know how we're going to react or respond to that chemical. That's why some people can take ibuprofen, some people can take Tylenol, some people can take aspirin, some people can take penicillin, but the main thing is that there's a presenting problem that we have that cause the physician to try to give us a solution. Now, what he does is he gives us a solution for the norm, for the majority of the people. But that solution doesn't fit everybody. There's going to be one person in there that's going to have some type of adverse reaction to the norm. And when that happens, we say that that person is allergic to whatever it is that we're using. So in reality, the solution that works for the norm becomes the distinct entity that sets apart from the norm. It becomes a temporary problem for them. Now, the mystery of it is that in the context when we're taking some type of chemical, that chemical that we use, say penicillin, for example, it does not produce euphoria. What it does, it produces great problems of maybe swelling, shortness of breath, some degree of anxiety and pain. Whatever the manifestations of it, it does not produce euphoria. Now, in this concept, the alcohol at the same time it produces a craving, but at the same time it also produces a euphoria. So therefore, when you're under the grips of an obsession, trying to use a temporary solution to a temporary problem, we form a habit of that. Every time that, and remember, the mind is a problem-solving, solution-oriented mechanism. It does not hold on to failure. It discards failure and it records success. And anytime we're inundated with the same problem, our mind sends us what works. Albeit, this solution that we have works temporarily. And what it does is that it masks the problem. It does not remove the problem. What it does, it suppresses the problem, which is anxiety or the emotional buildup, whatever it is that we have. It suppresses it, but at the same time, we begin to form the habitual cycle of whenever we experience that, use this temporary solution. And we use this temporary solution for years. And we're talking about the people that are talked about last night that are not readily have the 50 percentile of the enzymes. So therefore, we form a habit in using a temporary solution to affect a solution to a temporary problem. Sickworth is going to talk a little bit more about this. Also, he's going to talk about the 5 types of alcoholics, the classification of 5 types. In other words, when we use alcohol, all of us do not react the same way. Remember, I say it's an experiment. Some of us, when we use alcohol, we may go into a deep depression, start crying in our beer. Some of us, when we use alcohol, we may turn into Don Juan. The ladies' man. Some of us use alcohol, we get completely and totally violent. But the thing that we all have in common is the craving. And some of us use alcohol, we may jump up on the table here and go to dancing. But we react different to it. But the thing that we have in common is a craving. That reminds me of the guy that went into the pub. And he tells the bartender, "Bartender, pour everybody a drink. Pour yourself a drink. Pour me a drink." Bartender pours everybody a drink, and he says, "That would be 55 pounds. He says, "I don't have it." So the bartender says, "Don't you ever come back in here and do that again." So sure enough, the next day he comes back in. "Bartender, pour me a drink. Pour everybody a drink. Pour yourself a drink." Bartender pours everybody a drink, pours him a drink. He says, "That'll be 60 pounds. He says, "Didn't I tell you not to come back in here again and do that?" So he grabs him by the nape of the neck and throws him out the pub, and he hits out in the street. Well, the very next day he comes back and do the same thing. "Bartender, pour me a drink. Pour everybody a drink." And the bartender says, "Well, what about me? You not buying me a drink?" He says, "No, you get too violent when you drink." So that's about the way a psychologist next page, Victor. Second paragraph, on the other hand.
On the other hand, as strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems, he despaired of ever solving them.
I'm sorry, I told you wrong. Frothy emotional appeal.
Gotcha. Frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives.
Mm-hmm.
If any feel that as psychiatrists directing a hospital for alcoholics we appear somewhat sentimental, let them stand with us for a while on the firing line. See the tragedies, the despairing wives, the little children. Let the solving of these problems become a part of their daily work, and even of their sleeping moments, and the most cynical will not wonder that we have accepted and encouraged this movement. We feel after many years of experience that we have found nothing which has contributed more to the rehabilitation of these men than the altruistic movement now growing up among them.
Mm-hmm.
Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot after a time differentiate the true from the false.
Now, there being the euphoria produced, and there being the mystery of the obsession, and also he talks about a physical allergy. You see, I can remember my first drink, and I was explaining that to a gentleman last night. I myself was the one that was immediately alcoholic from the very first introduction to alcohol. The first time, I remember it vividly, my father gave me a cap of wine, a little cap of wine. And I drank that wine, and I thought for years that the reason that I got drunk was because I liked the tangy taste of the wine. But I found out much later that when alcohol was introduced into my life, that the reason I kept running back and taking a sip out of that bottle was because of the craving. And the reason that it confirms that was the fact that, you know, I've never drank Coca-Cola like that. I like Coca-Cola too. But I kept drinking this alcohol to the point where I got drunk. And when I got drunk, I got a whipping. I got consequences. I could never, ever, ever use alcohol safely. And as I began to get older, and when I started using alcohol on a regular basis, which was about 12 or 13 years old, I could never, ever, ever function. Smashing cars, passing out, getting into fights. The list go on and on and on. I could never use it safely. And for years, I was inundated in ignorance until I heard this explain the difference between the normal and abnormal drinker. I could never use alcohol in a normal way. And when this was explained to me about once the phenomenon of craving sets in, there was no control. I could not use alcohol and attend any type of social setting and not make a fool out of myself or get into a fight or just completely ruin the evening for everybody. So I was never a social drinker. And the point is that what Silkworth is talking about is so elusive. Because I would tell myself, and I would see my friends, if he could drink, I can drink. And I would do this over and over and over again. And the part where it says that we do this so much that we cannot differentiate the truth from the false. And then we read on the previous pages that we did not like to think ourselves to be outright mental defectives. In other words, we didn't like to think ourselves different from someone else. But then he also emphasizes the point that we must believe that we have a physical allergy to alcohol. Keep reading, Victor.
To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. And he said sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they had succumbed to the desire, again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience the entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery.
Now, he's emphasizing that the entire psychic change, when we look at the word psychic, we're talking about of the mind, not of the body. And he's talking about, as we go on, that equates to a personality change. Now, the personality change is not accomplished by just attending meetings. The personality change is accomplished by working the steps and working with others. And that's going to be emphasized over and over in these next pages that we're going to read all the way up to 103. Keep reading, Victor.
On the other hand, and strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems, he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol, the only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules.
Now he calls them simple rules here. And the simple rules, as we go through the rest of the book, he's going to call them different things. Simple rules, guides of progress, simple kit of spiritual tools. But the point is that there are actions that need to be taken. And I'm going to emphasize actions. Keep reading.
Men have cried out to me in sincere and despairing appeal. Doctor, I cannot go on like this. I have everything to live for. I must stop, but I cannot. You must help me. Faced with this problem, if a doctor is honest with himself, he must sometimes feel his own inadequacy. Although he gives all that is in him, it is often not enough. One feels that something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change.
And the meetings are human power. Keep reading.
Though the aggregate of recoveries resulting from psychiatric effort is considerable, we physicians must admit we have made little impression upon the problem as a whole. Many types do not respond to the ordinary psychological approach.
Now, this next paragraph that we're going to read, he's going to re-emphasize this. I do not hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. In other words, willpower does not work. I've had many men who had, for example, worked for periods of months on some problem or business deal which was to be settled on a certain date favorably to them. They took a drink a day or so prior to this date, and then the phenomenon of craving at once became of paramount at all other interests, so that the important appointment was not met. These men were not drinking to escape. They were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control. There are many situations which arise out of the phenomenon of craving which cause men to make the supreme sacrifice rather than to fight. Now he's going to talk about the type of alcoholics, the classification of alcoholics. Says the classification of alcoholics seems most difficult and in much detail outside the scope of this book. There are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We're all familiar with this type. They're always going on the wagons for keep. They're over-remorseful and make many resolutions but never a decision. There's the type of man who is unwilling to admit that he cannot take a drink. This is a schizophrenic. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment. And then he says, there's the type who always believes, this is neurotic, that he believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, that he can take a drink without danger. Then he labels this type. He says, then there's the manic depressive type, who is perhaps the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be written. Then he talks about us. Then there are types entirely normal in every respect except in the effect that alcohol has upon them. They're often able, intelligent, and friendly people. But then he says, all these and many others have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. This phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. It has never been, by any treatment with which we are familiar, permanently eradicated. The only relief that we have suggested is entire abstinence. Now that word that he uses, entire abstinence, I think that sort of goes over most of our heads. Now, the reason being is that he has talked about the twofold problem. So entire abstinence does not only mean abstinence out of the body, it also means abstinence out of the mind. And we're sitting here today, and none of us are inundated in the alcohol in our body. But I dare say, some of us still have an alcoholic thinking. Some of us still are wrestling with the point of maybe I am and maybe I'm not. You know, we don't sit here and wonder on a daily basis what our name is. We know precisely who we are. But the point is that we have to have entire abstinence. Now, abstinence in the body has to be achieved in the mind. The mind has to completely be in control of the body. But in this concept, because the mind produces an obsession, and when we have this emotional barometer, and this emotional barometer rises to a level that produces uncomfortability, that we're not comfortable, then the mind starts looking for ways to get comfortable. Now, normal people find other ways to get comfortable. Some of them jog, some of them ride bicycles, you know, but that solution doesn't come to us. You see, we got this memory pathway that the first time that we use this substance, it produced a temporary solution. And every time we get to the point, some people call it building up to drink, we go through this emotional catharsis, and then our mind tells us, well, what did we do the last time we felt this way? And we'll tell ourselves something like this: well, I'm just going to take a few, or I'm just going to have one. And we even tell ourselves this: nobody will know. And here's another thing. We go to great lengths trying to deny and lie about our drinking, but at the same time, once we start drinking, everybody knows. Consider that psychology. Now remember, Silkworth says, we cannot differentiate the truth from the false. So here he's going to reemphasize again, Victor.
This immediately precipitates us into a seething cauldron of debate. Much has been written, pro and con, but among physicians, the general opinion seems to be that most chronic alcoholics are doomed. Surprisingly, that holds true somewhat today. Mm-hmm. What is the solution? Perhaps I can best answer this by relating one of my experiences. About 1 year prior to this experience, a man was brought in to be treated for chronic alcoholism. He had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage and seemed to be a case of pathological mental deterioration. He had lost everything worthwhile in life and was only living, one might say, to drink. He frankly admitted and believed that for him there was no hope. Following the elimination of alcohol, there was found to be no permanent brain injury. He accepted the plan outlined in this book.
Now, Silkworth himself is emphasizing the solution. You know, most of us are used to talking about the solution on page 17. But Silkworth has talked about the problem. Now he's going to emphasize the solution. Reread that paragraph again, Victor, please.
About 1 year prior to this experience, a man was brought in to be treated for chronic alcoholism.
Now, the reason I asked him to reread it is because I want you to see the condition that this chap is in, physically so. Keep reading.
He had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage and seemed to be a case of pathological mental deterioration.
Now, look at that terminology. Pathological mental deterioration. Keep reading.
He had lost everything worthwhile in his life and was only living, one might say, to drink. He frankly admitted and believed that for him there was no hope. Following the elimination of alcohol, there was found to be no permanent brain injury. He accepted the plan outlined in this book. 1 year later, he called to see me, and I experienced a very strange sensation. I knew the man by name and partly recognized his features, but there all resemblance ended. From a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. I talked with him for some time, but was not able to bring myself to feel that I had known him before. To me, he was a stranger, and so he left me. A long time has passed with no return to alcohol.
Now, the key emphasis in this paragraph is this. Silkworth says this. He says that following the elimination of alcohol, there was found to be no permanent brain injury. He accepted the plan outlined in the book. He did not say he went to meetings. The plan outlined in the book, which caused the chap not to return to alcohol. Now, Silkworth is emphasizing this. We haven't even got to step 2 yet. Keep reading.
When I need a mental uplift, I often think of another case brought in by a physician prominent in New York. The patient had made his own diagnosis and, deciding his situation hopeless, had hidden in a deserted barn, determined to die.
Now listen to this chap, how he describes him.
He was rescued by a searching party and in desperate condition brought to me. Following his physical rehabilitation, he had a talk with me in which he frankly stated he thought the treatment was a waste of effort, unless I could assure him, which no one ever had, that in the future he would have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. His alcoholic problem was so complex and his depression so great that we felt his only hope would be through what we called moral psychology, and we doubted even if that would have any effect. However,
Wait a minute now. Now, as we go through this, I want someone in here to point out to me in the next 103 pages that we're going to go through where it says that we have to go to meetings in this book. Now, reread that again, Victor.
the last paragraph.
Yes. Because Dr. Silkworth is emphasizing something else.
His alcoholic problem was so complex and his depression so great that we felt his only hope would be through what we then called moral psychology, and we doubted if even that would have any effect. However, he did become sold on the ideas contained in this book.
Oh boy, there it goes again.
He has not had a drink for a great many years. I see him now and then, and he is as fine a specimen of manhood as one could wish to meet. I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through, and though perhaps he came to scoff, he may remain to pray.
You mean Silkworth didn't advise you to go to meetings? Make 90 meetings in 90 days? Now I'm being a little facetious here, but I'm really driving home a very important point to us. Because what I'd like to do is take a little sidebar here and read this pamphlet from AA. Just to let you know, this is an AA conference approved material, and it says members' eye view of Alcoholics Anonymous. And this is page 14. It says, there is a widely held belief that in AA that if a newcomer will simply continue to attend meetings, someday something will finally rub off on you. As the implication, of course, it is that something which rubs off will be the so-called miracle of AA. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that many people in AA accept this statement quite literally. I have observed them over the years. They faithfully attend meetings, faithfully waiting for something to rub off. The funny part about it is that something rubbing off on them is death. They sit there week after month after year while mental, spiritual, and physical rigor mortis slowly sets in. I believe the real miracle of AA, the something that will rub off, we hope, is simply the alcoholic's willingness to act. Why he finally become willingness, I hope to touch on later. Right now, let's turn our attention to what it is that he becomes willing to do. AA has been happily called a program of action. In fact, one of our most quoted aphorisms is that action is the magic word. When the newcomer hears this, he invariably gets a mental picture of attending meetings, making what are known as 12-step calls on other alcoholics, speaking at meetings, joining committees, in general, a kind of constant rushing in to and fro. Let's see whether this is really what it is. Then it goes on talking about the steps. It says, what you have just heard are the AA famed steps. I didn't read them all. They have been described by various members at various times in various phrases ranging from golden stairs of happiness to all that God stuff. Now I try to propose some questions which may help us understand the impact of the 12 steps have upon the lives of thousands of alcoholics and their already demonstrated efficacy in dealing with the problem of alcoholism. First, does it come as a surprise to you, as it did to me, that there is nothing physical in this program? No leafy green vegetables, no vitamins, no daily calisthenics. I think this is because that from the very beginning, the alcoholic in AA has believed that the physical aspects of our disease would have little import if they were not accompanied by an equally progressive spiritual deterioration. Now, it says in AA, the reporting is clear and unmistakable. Here are the steps we took, say those who have gone before. The newcomer finally sees that he too must take these steps before he is entitled to report on them. And in an atmosphere where the constant subject is what I did and what I think, no neurotic can long resist the temptation to get it on in the action. In an organization whose members are always secretly convinced that they are unique, no neurotic is long going to be contented with the report of what others are doing. This is a pamphlet from AA. And the point is that the way that we get healthy and the way that we get sober. I'm not giving you my opinion. I'm just reading what AA. And I'm reading out of the book. That's what the book says. That's not what Larry says. The thing is that we have a program that has worked for many years. And those of you all who are familiar with a recipe, if you follow the recipe and you do exactly what the recipe asks you to do, put this amount at this particular time and do it this way, then you come out with the recipe of the cake. But if the cake fails, we don't blame the recipe. We blame the preparer. So therefore, we have a recipe for recovery. And if done by the recipe in the book, we shall recover. But if we treat it like a smorgasbord, taking what we can use, putting in what we think, using it when we want to, the recipe is doomed to fail. But if we follow the recipe, and this book is a book of directions, it is a book of a problem-solving, solution-oriented process. The recipe of problem-solving is so astute until over 200 other groups use the 12 steps. They don't use Gestalt therapy. They don't use RET, rational emotive therapy. They don't use therapeutic community. They use the 12 steps because the 12-step works. Over 200 other groups. So we're going to continue on. We're going to take a break here in about 12 minutes, which is about 10:30. When it gets 10:30, if we're reading, somebody wave their hand and let us know. Our egos are not that strong, but we can't acknowledge that we're trying to go over time. So let's keep reading, Victor.
Picking back up on page 1, chapter 1, Bill's story. War fever ran high in the New England town to which we knew young officers from Plattsburgh were assigned, and we were flattered when the first citizens took us to their homes, making us feel heroic. Here was love, applause, war, moments sublime with intervals hilarious. I was part of life at last, and in the midst of the excitement, I discovered liquor.
Now listen, in midst of the excitement, he discovered liquor. Listen to how, Bill is a very prolific writer. Listen to how he describes his mental state at this particular time. Keep reading.
I forgot the strong warnings and the prejudices of my people concerning drink. In time, we sailed for over there. I was lonely and again turned to alcohol.
See, there's a problem solver. Keep reading.
We landed in England. I visited Winchester Cathedral. Much moved, I wandered outside. My attention was caught by a doggerel on an old tombstone. Here lies a Hampshire grenadier who caught his death drinking cold small beer. A good soldier is ne'er forgot, whether he dieth by musket or pot. Ominous warning, which I failed to heed. 22 and a veteran of foreign wars, I went home at last. I fancied myself a leader, for had not the men of my battery given me a special token of appreciation. My talent for leadership, I imagined, would place me at the head of vast enterprises, which I would manage with the utmost assurance.
Sounds like a bit of grandeur, doesn't it?
Just a bit. I took a night law course and obtained employment as an investigator for a surety company. The drive for success was on. I'd proved to the world I was important.
Mm-hmm.
My work took me about Wall Street, and little by little, I became interested in the market. Many people lost money, but some became very rich. Why not I? I studied economics and business as well as law. Potential alcoholic that I was, I nearly failed my law course. At one of the finals, I was too drunk to think or write. Though my drinking was not yet continuous, it disturbed my wife. We had long talks when I would still her forebodings by telling her that men of genius conceived their best projects when drunk.
Now listen to how he puts this.
That the most majestic constructions of philosophic thought were so derived.
Mm-hmm. Now look at how Bill describes this. He says, although my drinking was not continuous, it disturbed my wife. It didn't disturb him.
He was loving it.
Typical alcoholic.
By the time I had completed the course, I knew the law was not for me. The inviting maelstrom of Wall Street had me in its grip. Business and financial leaders were my heroes. Out of this alloy of drink and speculation, I commenced to forge the weapon that one day would turn in its flight like a boomerang and all but cut me to ribbons.
Now, keep in mind also, Bill Wilson was a very intelligent man. Also during this time, he had applied for application to work for Thomas Edison. And Thomas Edison had this aptitude test that would exclude the 97% of people. In other words, only the top 3% could pass this test. And Bill Wilson passed the test. He had an invitation and an opportunity to work in Thomas Edison's lab in New York. But Wall Street grabbed him, and he left and went to Wall Street. So we're talking about a fellow that was very sharp, intellectual-wise, and also we see here this educated. But he never, ever finished anything that he started. The only thing that he did finish is when he was a little boy that he made this boomerang. But he had the determination to be the top at anything that he did. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move to page 3, second paragraph, because what we're going to talk about here is the progression of Bill's illness. For the next few years, fortune threw money and applause my way. I had arrived. My judgment and ideas were followed by many to the tune of paper millions. The great boom of the late 20s was seething and swelling. Drink was taking an important and exhilarating part of my life. Now he's beginning to see a little bit about that maybe he's got a problem. There was loud talk in the jazz places uptown. Everyone spent thousands and chattered in millions. Scoffers could scoff and be damned. I had made a host of fair weather friends. My drinking assumed more serious proportions, continuing all day and almost every night. The remonstrances of my friends terminated in a row, and I became a lone wolf. There were many unhappy scenes in our sumptuous apartments. There had been no real infidelity, for loyalty to my wife helped at times by extreme drunkenness, kept me out of those scrapes. In 1929, I contracted golf fever. We went at once to the country. My wife, to the applause that I had started out to, my wife to applaud while I had started out to overtake Walter Hagen. Liquor caught up with me much faster than I became up behind Walter. I began to be jittery in the morning. Golf permitted drinking every day and night. It was fun to carry him around the exclusive course which inspired such awe in me as a lad. I acquired the impeccable coat of a tan one sees on the well-to-do. The local banker watched me whirl fat checks in and out of the till with amused skepticism. And then he goes on to say and talk about the stock market breaking. And he says that men were jumping from the towers. He says, not me. He returned to the bar. Now we drop to the bottom paragraph when we're looking at some more deterioration. He says, we went to live with my wife's parents. I had found a job then and lost it as a result of a brawl with a taxi driver. Mercifully, no one could guess that I was to have no real employment for 5 years or hardly draw a sober breath. My wife began to work in a department store, coming home exhausted to find me drunk. I became an unwelcome hanger-on at the brokerage places.
And here it is.
Read.
Liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. Bathtub gin, 2 bottles a day, and often 3, got to be routine. Sometimes a small deal would net a few $100s, and I would pay my bills at the bars and delicatessens. This went on endlessly, and I began to waken very early the next morning, shaking violently. A tumbler full of gin, followed by a half-dozen bottles of beer, would be required if I were to eat any breakfast. Nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation, and there were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope. Gradually, things got worse. The house was taken over by the mortgage holder. My mother-in-law died. My wife and father-in-law became very ill. And then I got a promising business opportunity. Stocks were at the low point of 1932, and I'd somehow formed a group to buy. I was to share generously in the profits. Then I went on a prodigious bender, and the chance vanished. I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. Before then, I had written a lot of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business, and so I did.
Pull out willpower. You see that part about the prodigious bender, that's a story within itself. Well, Bill was with this group of guys, and he was to share in this business deal, and they was passing this Applejack around. And it went around twice, and Bill said, no thanks. But the third time it went around, one of the guys said, this is Jersey Lightning. And he, with no thought at all, Jersey Lightning, I've never had that before. And he turned it up to drink it. And that one drink threw this opportunity out the window. And when he saw that, then he pulled out willpower. Sick 'em will, but let's see what's going to happen. Keep reading, Victor.
Shortly afterward, I came home drunk.
Will said, let's take a drink too.
There had been no fight. Where had been my high resolve? I simply didn't know. It hadn't even come to mind. Someone had pushed a drink my way, and I had taken it. Was I crazy? I began to wonder, for such appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that.
Now he calls such appalling lack of perspective. That's Bill's 50-cent way of saying insanity. He's going to use another term. Such appalling lack of perspective. I want you to consider that. You see, a lot of times we think that the things that we do when we're drunk is abnormal. No, that's the normal things. But the insanity, which sets in, and our book says strangely insane. So we're not talking about the type of insanity that they talk about in the DSM-4. We're talking about a strange form of insanity, and that is while we're sitting right here now, stone, cold, dry, or sober within our bodies, and then the thought pops in our head to take a drink. Now that's insanity. Before we take the drink, not after we take it. Insanity pops in and causes us to think or believe a lie that we can do something that our body has proven over and over and over and over and over again that we can't do safely. Let's take a break, 15-minute break, and come back.